So just a quick few updates. First of all, I get faced with a 30-day ban on Facebook yet again, and this time for something like this. Yeah, in other words, if you basically say someone made a cunt of themselves, apparently that means it's the same thing as calling someone a cunt. But there you have it, somehow justifies a 30-day ban and is somehow offensive. So right now I can't really update my Facebook page on the Libertarian Views Scotty M. I think it'll get lifted in like the 12th of May or something like that. Second update to address is basically a change that I'm going to make to the YouTube channel. So I'm going to merge it together with that of my normal vlogging and photography channel. The vlogs are really just random stuff. The photography is just stuff to do with my photography stuff or whatever. And I just felt, well, it's getting neglected. I may as well just merge it all together. It's easier to date that way. I thought of a way, well, how am I going to work around this to make it, you know, work and everything. And I've got things planned out, so I will do a more specific video dedicated on that, and of course I will update you on things. The channel name itself I will rename to just my name because it's generic. In terms of branding, I will have to go into, you know, creating a separate brand image and everything for the thumbnails of those separate videos and whatnot. So let's get on to an argument by Vaush. Now, I don't know what his arguments are. Let's just check out.
Thomas Sowell hot takes. Really? I had a person email me recently saying that I didn't do enough due diligence in giving Thomas Sowell credit. But every time I look at this guy's work or his quotes or anything, I haven't read his books, but anytime I look at literally anything from him, he comes off like legitimately stupid.
How the hell can you possibly say that he comes across as stupid and yet not even read a single bit of his work? Yeah, I mean, it's just, this is the logic behind the political left. I mean, if you're actually going to call him stupid, give an actual reason for why he's stupid.
Not just wrong, but like he doesn't even understand the concepts that he's talking about.
That is not true, folk. He more than understands what he's speaking about, especially when he speaks about everything to do with prices, the role of prices, the profits and losses. He gives much information, historical information, context, everything in relation to do with the economic calculation problem, and gives so much information even on how businesses operate and how they can fail, etc. just with the changes in the market. He gives so much information history. That is proof that he's never read his work. If he's actually going to critique, you know, Thomas Sowell, then he's going to have to actually read his content.
The strongest argument for socialism is that it sounds good. The strongest argument against socialism is that it doesn't work. Can you imagine somebody like Karl Marx saying a statement like this about capitalism?
The problem with this argument is the fact that even within his book Basic Economics, Thomas Sowell does cover so much information on the flaw of socialism, especially in relation to do with prices. Now, when you leave prices be to the market, you're speaking about capitalism. Socialism is really all about controlling prices. Even Kevin D. Williamson addresses this point. Karl Marx viewed prices as something endogenous, not exogenous. In other words, something that's exogenous means that it's an external factor that will influence that, such as consumers' demand. Karl Marx viewed price as something fixable, that it was something knowable, that it could be determined simply by labour time and labour quantity. Now, if anybody tries to argue with that, they don't even understand anything at all today with the Marxist labour theory of value, and have clearly never studied it. You see, the one problem you'll find with socialists love to redefine everything and remove the goalposts. They always do that. Take, for example, you know, communal ownership of property. They contradict themselves by then trying to say that socialism's got something to do with personal ownership. What the hell has personal ownership got to do with communal ownership? Communal ownership is communal ownership. Personal is individual ownership. Something that's personal is personal. It's individual. It's nothing to do with collective. How the hell did, you know, socialism going from being, you know, collective ownership of the means of production to this of something personal? And that's exactly what we mean about socialists moving the goalposts persistently, and it's why you never really argue with them. You're basically arguing with someone who just constantly changes the subject, contradicts themselves, constantly redefines everything, and it's just like a waste of time. Thomas Sowell understands the very reason why socialism fails. He explains that in his book Basic Economics. Although I haven't read his particular chapter yet on to do with socialism, he has certainly covered that in the prior chapters to do especially with prices. Take take, for example, the Soviet Union and the problems that it was faced with regards to price controls, the price fixing. It's the very reason why, with 24 million other prices, they were faced with surplus waste and shortage problems. Again, you could even look at quotes by Soviet Union economists Nikolai Shmelev and Vladimir Popov, and they could tell you themselves just how inefficient, socialism was. But of course, this is where the likes of Vaush will probably come out and say, oh, but that wasn't true socialism. Again, if you actually read Christian Niemiec's book, Socialism, the Failed Idea That Never Dies, you'll find he covers 3 phases with socialism. And every time with these socialist regimes, when it was through its honeymoon phase, which is the first phase, whether it was the Soviet Union of the 1930s or you're talking about Venezuela during the, oil boom phase right up to 2008 under Hugo Chavez, these are the phases where socialists proudly boasted and beat their chests and they, shout from the rooftops, oh, look how democratic and wonderful socialism is. The funny thing was, the food shortages and blackouts were coming around even as early as 2003, immediately following the price controls. They call socialism democratic when it's through this honeymoon phase. It's not until they actually begin to face these problems where it's a serious crisis that they begin to say, oh, it was never socialism. And that's the reason why, you look at, for example, Noam Chomsky, where he said, on one hand, oh, look at how wonderful socialism is. Oh, it's this idealistic place to show the world the way forward. Pretty much more or less what he's saying with his first quote. And then goes on to say exactly this, and you just kind of laugh at this because it's a complete contradiction of everything he was saying. This is what you get with the likes of Vaush. You can't exactly take them seriously. So yes, Thomas Sowell is right about socialism.
I want you to think about it for a second. Think about left intellectuals, okay? Can you ever imagine them saying something as vacuous as this?
What exactly is vacuous about him stating that socialism doesn't work? Why is that vacuous? I really don't understand for the life of me. All it takes is an explanation about the economic calculation problem, the knowledge problem, the very issue that you're faced with by destroying the private sector. That's the only rational way you can finance the economy, because without the private sector you're left with the printing press, and if you're not going to run the printing press then you're going to be left with a moneyless based economy. So how then do you operate an economy efficiently with no information of price signals? Oh, that's right, you didn't know that the prices were signals. You just thought prices were just merely something of an obstacle standing in the way of getting things that you want, didn't you? See, this is why he admitted that. He stated, I have never read his work. Well, we know that for a fact, because if you actually read his work, he actually goes into explaining the very fault of socialism. If you don't have market-driven prices, you are pretty much screwed.
But those who live by words will always have a soft spot in their hearts for socialism because it sounds so good. So essentially what he's saying is, socialism doesn't work, but it sounds good. So people who like things that sound good think it looks good, or whatever.
Well, that's pretty much what he's saying. At the end of the day, it's just like how people think that the free stuff sounds good, It's like saying free education and free healthcare, but it isn't free. It never was free, and your so-called free stuff is actually more expensive. Not that you would ever understand that fact, because people like you have never studied the broken window fallacy, and you don't understand the very issue with the fact that everything in the background is actually where the money comes from in order to pay for everything. So you're compensating in other areas of the economy. So exactly, that's exactly what he means. It sounds good, but in practice, how's it going to be? How's it going to be when you get rid of the private sector? And that's the difference, Vaush. I live in Britain. I've got first-hand experience to understand that our education system's diabolical. It is state education. And I've even got first-hand experience to say about the NHS, which really is a pile of shit. That is me basically being nice about it. These are the same people who say, oh, the NHS, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not until, of course, all these crises come along and then they start using up all these excuses and saying, oh, it's all because of the underfunding. What a load of crap. If it was underfunding, why the hell is the NHS budget continuously been increasing? As you can see from this this graph. In other words, the spending has been increasing in the NHS. People just make up excuses for all these things. Just like your own anti-capitalist, pro-corporatist, socialist main American healthcare market that people like you try to call capitalist. You didn't like that one, did you? You probably don't even know anything about, the American Medical Association monopoly, the overregulation of the private sector, which you would try to call capitalist, and of course the third-party payer system. Or of course you could go on about introducing insurance for absolutely everything through Obamacare, which was otherwise known as the Affordable Care Act. So yes, socialism from face value sounds nice, but in reality and practice, when you're left running the printing press, how's it going to be good then? It's not going to be.
Can you imagine if somebody like Marx had written something as reductive and stupid and meaningless as this?
Karl Marx was that stupid. He thought that value was down to the quantity of labour as well as, the time that you spend on producing something. And how, the likes of Milton Friedman, one of the greatest economists, someone I greatly admire, Milton Friedman had once said to these workers in China or whatever it was, about that of digging, and he says, why don't you use tablespoons? In other words, just to take the piss out of them, because at the end of the day it's going to take you longer and harder work using tablespoons than it would using shovels. He was asking them why they weren't using machinery, because machinery would allow you to do it quicker. Marx somehow thought that was, a detriment. For some strange reason, he thought that was a detriment. He thinks that just because you have more labour on something and more time you spend on producing something, that somehow, determines its value. So that goes to tell you just how stupid Karl Marx was, because you could spend days, you could spend months producing something, and at the end of the day you could put it out there on the shelves and you've got no way of determining whether it's going to sell or not, because the reality is it's down to the consumer. And I had this argument with Vicky 1999. She doesn't understand herself. It's just like that film on Robert the Bruce, I think it was, or something, and nobody ever wanted to see it. It was just a load of crap, basically. Because nobody wanted to go and see it, blasts that entire argument apart, because so many people went into producing the film, a lot of money went into producing the film, but nobody wanted to see it, so it was a waste. There's its real value. So Karl Marx wasn't exactly this great intellectual that you like to think he is.
Really, honestly think about it. It's this means nothing. Maybe he's playing to the audience? Yeah, no shit. Because Thomas Sowell isn't an academic. Thomas Sowell is a demagogue.
You're honestly having a laugh. I mean, you've never touched an economics textbook in your life. You've never read Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics. Even within the first few chapters, he touches upon the role of prices and in relation to do with profits and losses, the price ceilings, the price floors, etc. And he goes through so much valuable information. You cannot critique that. The best you can do is just say he was a demagogue, and that's your argument. You've never read his work. You don't even know what his work is about, but you'll just call him a demagogue. Yeah, that's a wonderful argument, that is. You really won the argument now. How have you won the argument? Just because he made a quote that socialism doesn't work, it doesn't mean to say that is his actual argument against socialism. He doesn't just say, oh well, socialism doesn't work. Maybe if you actually read his material, you'll actually get to understand why socialism doesn't work. Then you'll understand his arguments. Of course, you don't bother. This is the problem with you socialists. You make baseless arguments, baseless claims, and you've never get anything to ever back up what you say. And the most laughable claim of all is the one to even think that computer technology, regardless of how good it is, could somehow solve the economic calculation problem. That's the biggest laugh of all.
He's just Ben Shapiro. That's it. He's in that ballpark, okay? He's a person who uses a veneer of academic credential to push pseudo-intellectualism and have it fucking be worshipped.
Really? So why is it then when setting down price ceilings that immediately following that you would see price shortage problems then? We saw that in 1974 with the shortage at the pump. We saw that in 1978 in the United States with the shortage at the pump. We saw that with the housing shortage crisis that, of course, Thomas Sowell gives the example of during the Second World War. A housing shortage crisis immediately occurred following that of the rent controls. Now, as if by magic, and of course Thomas Sowell does mention this, immediately as soon as the price ceilings were removed, the price shortage problems immediately disappeared. How do you explain that? You could even look at this with that of Venezuela, and the example where your kind went around claiming that, oh well, the United States of America laid down sanctions and this was the cause of their economic crisis. The problem with that argument was the United States of America did not impose economic sanctions on Venezuela until mid-2017. The sanctions in 2014 and 2015 were not economic sanctions. The food shortage crisis and the blackouts began as early as 2003, immediately following the price controls, the price ceilings on food. But of course, you would just completely brush that aside and pretend that that wasn't the case, because you require excuses to just blame it elsewhere. But the problem with your argument is the very fact that the food shortage crisis began in 2003 during the oil boom, right up to 2008, January 2008. That excuse just goes flying right out the window and you've not even got any left. Yeah.
Socialism in general has a record of failure so blatant that only an intellectual could evade or ignore it. I think this quote is defensible, if you count socialism to mean like governments which call themselves socialist.
That is, of course, if you want to completely redefine socialism, and this is the point that I'm getting at, because when it comes down to your socialists, you redefine absolutely everything. What you're speaking about when you talk about socialism, it's all theoretical nonsense, like the theory of Marxism, all this theoretical pish that you can, have this moneyless, classless, stateless system. There's no government, there's no money, it's just classless, etc. But there's a difference between theory and practice. And what we're speaking about when we define socialism, we're defining it by the most common dictionary definition of socialism and the socialism we've seen in the real world. Not the socialism that's stuck inside your head that's never existed. It didn't exist in anarchist Catalonia that was never anarchist. It didn't exist in the Paris Commune that you love to talk about. It didn't exist in the Ukraine Free Territory that was never a free territory. It was just another terror regime like that of the anarchist Catalonia and Paris Commune. In fact, it was just like Chaz. It was like the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. You always do this. You redefine everything to do with socialism because, oh, that wasn't true socialism. But I'm afraid the most common dictionary definition of socialism points to governmental ownership. But it's not as simple as that, because you have a mixed economy where you've got capitalism and socialism. And in the mixed economy, socialism is state direction of the economy as a whole. When you're speaking about capitalism with regards to prices, you're speaking about leaving it down to the market. So in other words, prices fluctuate. When you talk about socialism, you're talking about controlling prices. For example, the difference between capitalism and socialism would be capitalism leaving interest rates down to the free market, down to the laws of supply and demand, whereas your socialism is about trying to control the interest rates. And how convenient, because that's exactly what led to the boom and bust cycle of the 20th century that your kind tried to blame on capitalism. Isn't that truly fantastic? And then you say, oh, but that wasn't socialism. So if it wasn't socialism in this mixed economy, what the bloody hell was it? Because capitalism is about leaving it down to the laws of supply and demand. Of course, your type love to redefine everything. You see, socialism is defined by political centralisation, whether you like that fact or not. After all, the name socialism is about socialising property, to socialise. To socialise is to centralise, means to collectivise. When you socialise medicine, you're bringing in universal healthcare, which is collectivised healthcare. Collectivism is synonymous to socialism. So socialism is defined around political centralisation, and that fact you utterly despise. The second fact of what defines socialism is economic central planning. That is something that you socialists have tried your damned hardest to try and redefine and pull yourself away from. And the reason why you've tried to redefine socialism and pull yourself away from central planning is because it was a bloody failure. It was faced with the economic calculation problem. That's the reason why you tried to redefine socialism. The other issue was to do with that of, the collective ownership ownership and control of the means of production, etc., etc. In the mixed economy, socialism is present. You can see that socialism with the state ownership of the fire service, or the state ownership of healthcare or education, or whatever it may be. So socialism does have its presence. What you're trying to do is you're trying to oversimplify everything, as if to say, socialism isn't present, but that just isn't true. Even capitalism is present to this day in this mixed economy. It might not be a socialist system, it might not be a capitalist system, but it's a mixed economy between capitalism and socialism, and you have to be able to identify what the problems are. We know what the bloody real problems are. The problems was your socialism, with all of its intervention in the economy that created all the very problems that you see today, such as the oligopolies, the monopolies, the cartels, etc., etc.